Some startling new information about Amr Kassam, a report that the Canadian permanent resident was killed in a firefight in Egypt. A quick look at the Facebook page reveals his radical sympathies. He was not a fan of the Muslim Brotherhood. Instead, he opted for the much more radical Islamic Salafi movement. He expressed support for none other than Osama bin Laden. And he wasn't worried about outgoing and ongoing violence in the region. He was willing to set buildings on fire in protest of the interim military government. Toronto Sun columnist Simon Kent has more. Simon, this guy spent some time in Canada. Apparently, he was a pharmacist, and according to the reports, he's now been killed. Maybe it may take a while to confirm. There's not much rule of law in that part of the world.
There's not much rule of law there, and I wouldn't be holding my breath to find out exactly the circumstances surrounding his death. But we do know this. He was a man that went looking for trouble, and it found him. And it found him in the most deadly of circumstances, in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Right now, Cairo and across the river in Alexandria would be two of the worst places in the world for anyone to be. And to go there voluntarily and then to be taking sides into this sectarian strife that's going on really defies belief. This man had a right to permanent residency here in Canada, and for whatever reasons he chose, he went to that part of the world, and he's paid a terrible price, and his family will be left to grieve a husband, a brother and a father. And it's sad on a lot of levels, but there it is. It's a fact.
And it would be very, very hard to sell anybody on the idea that he wasn't communicating in this country, and that there aren't some people in this country, whether it's in Toronto or elsewhere in Canada, who know this guy, who've communicated with this guy, and most important, share his ideology.
Indeed, and he was the man that took his ideology one step further and tried to make it a practicality. Perhaps that's why he went to Egypt. Perhaps that's what he was trying to act out. He was trying to give energetic muscle to his own beliefs. But here is a country that is being torn apart, and here is a city itself in Cairo where I'd sort of argue that nowhere is safe. And we've seen some terribly graphic images on YouTube and Facebook and Reddit and a whole lot of social networking sites about what is going on there. It's a terribly dangerous place, and perhaps the question to answer is just why someone would give up the safety and comfort of living in Canada and take their family over to this country. It defies belief in a way, and someone will eventually have to explain the actions of this man. He can't explain them himself because he's dead.
And that's always the problem we have when, we're trying to stay with reason. Reasoning with the unreasonable, I guess, is unreasonable. And most people who get that torqued up about ideology, there's usually something missing. That rational chromosome just doesn't seem to be activated. I don't want to do too much amateur psychology on this. It just seems to me that most ideologues are rather irrational. And so let me just go to something else here, because when the Muslim Brotherhood was running the show in Egypt for the short while they were, we were told by a lot of people, don't worry about it. They're not violent. They renounce violence. They got these partners, though, that are a little more radical, and maybe they're prone to violence, and they've got to use them to be able to stay in power. It's part of the coalition. That's the Salafis, and that seems to be the wing of radical Islam that this fellow was following. What can you tell us, Simon, about the Salafis?
Well, the Salafis are sort of the blood and thunder arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, and perhaps that gives a good reason why the Muslim Brotherhood was banned since the 1920s in Egypt. No one knew what they were going to do. And when you look at the regime that was toppled, that the Muslim Brotherhood ran, that they suddenly had to take ideology and make it real and turn it into government. The two things they didn't do were deliver jobs and put food on the table. You have an economy that is in collapse. It's in free fall in Egypt. And no matter how driven these ideologues are in the Muslim Brotherhood, people still want jobs. They want a future for their children. They want food on the table. They want all the basics, all the bread and butter, if you'll pardon the pun, issues of politics that we in Canada take for granted. In Egypt, they couldn't deliver that, and look what's happened. And the future looks so bleak for Egypt. The country is collapsing under the weight of its own civil war. America gives $1.2, $1.3 billion a year in aid, and that's nothing. All that does is ensures that there's someone else on the other end of the line who'll pick up the phone in Egypt and talk to the US and listen to them. If the US, this is the bind, if they turn off the aid tomorrow, then no one will be listening to them, and that's just one more conduit, one more lifeline to try and put some sense into what is happening in Egypt. Because let's be frank, it's a bloody catastrophe, and they're strong words, but it is a catastrophe that is being played out right now, and the world is running out of options, just like the people of Cairo are.
Simon, thank you so much for defining what aid is all about. Aid is not charity. This isn't giving money to the orphanage. Aid is about purchasing access. You cannot play unless you pay. And so I'm so glad you said that, because not enough pundits are saying that. They're always putting this aid in the form of charity. And yes, the West has some leverage with aid, but it's not just leverage that the West has. The West has access, and that matters. So here's what matters today. Today, it's absolutely clear that the military regime in Egypt wants to go back to the days of Nasser and drive the Muslim Brotherhood underground. They want to make it an illegal organization. They want to ban all activity related to the Muslim Brotherhood. It sounds to me, Simon, that we're in for a very, very long slog.
Yes, and buckle up, because it's going to be a really rough ride. And when we're talking about aid, I just mentioned the US and their aid. The prime enabler of Egypt is Saudi Arabia. And the Saudis, the phone will always answer in Cairo when the Saudis ring, because there's billions of dollars being sent that way. Again, it gives them traction. It gives them access to the people who make the decisions. It gives them access to the executive. Perhaps the Saudis could pick up the phone and use some of their influence, because clearly the US and clearly Obama has tried and Obama has failed miserably, and maybe the Saudis could use some of their weight, because if they don't, we're going to see something along the lines of what is happening in Syria today. And that is not very pretty to look at, and I really hope that that future doesn't await for the Egyptian people.
But Simon, we have been waiting for so many battles in so many countries to have the big battle, that Armageddon-like battle against political Islam. That was being talked about in Iraq. It was being talked about elsewhere. Now, of course, Egypt is front and center. Do you believe that if the Muslim Brotherhood can be defeated, if it can be turned into ashes in Egypt, do you think that radical Islam has been defeated?
I don't know, but maybe the boot should be on the foot. Maybe radical Islam should look at itself and what it's offering beyond its ideology and its religion, and it gets back to basics. It's got to give people what they want. Otherwise, they get lost, and you get lost in a civil war. Put bread on the table, give people a job, give people a future. And there's really simple points that clearly the Muslim Brotherhood didn't grasp when it was last in government. They might have a long time to think about it now, because they're going to be banned. They're going to be an agency that is seen as an enemy of the people in Egypt. Maybe they'll have another 70 years to think about where they went wrong. The cost here is in human blood. The cost is measured in human lives, and it's an atrocious cost. And the Muslim Brotherhood would really be encouraged to be reflective and look at themselves about where they go next. And Egypt may well be in for another a long line of military rule, and that won't help them either.
Sami Yatim, taking it back to your own doorstep there in Toronto. Sami Yatim, he was the young man in the streetcar with the knife. He was taken down by police. Police naturally call it a takedown. Some people who saw the video are calling it something else. They're calling it an execution. The SIU has now done its investigation. Charges being laid. What can you tell us?
Well, charges have been laid, and this will now be played out in a court in probably 12 to 16 months' time. There are a lot of questions, and we live in a world now where nothing is private anymore. What happened on that night was all captured by cell phones, by social media, and was instantly shared. You look at the pictures, it doesn't look very good. There's up to a dozen police officers, one man inside that streetcar with a knife. He was clearly not a threat to anything or anyone other than himself. The police have been accused of overreacting. Some people might say, fair-minded people, 9 or 10 shots at one man and then tasering him. Was this a correct use of force? Was any effort made to de-escalate what was going on there? There are a lot of really crucial questions to be answered. As I said, it's all captured on social media. It's all there for people to see. This will come out in court, and we do give the understanding of innocence. Everyone's innocent until proven guilty, but there's going to be a lot of hard work done here, and I think justice should not only be done, it should be seen to be done in an open forum. Let's hope we hear the whole story about why this wasn't de-escalated, and we need to know why this young man is dead.
Well, the trial isn't going to be going on tomorrow or the next day or even the next day when the heat is really on. When things cool down, a year from now, a year and a half from now, that's when we have the trial. Do you think at that point it'll still be a murder charge, or do you think at that point it gets reduced to criminal negligence?
It's second-degree murder at the moment. It depends on the plea. It depends on a lot of circumstances, and it sounds like I'm sitting on the fence because I don't know a lot about it at the moment. The court appearance is today. We'll hear what the plea is. We'll hear his legal counsel lay out their case, lay out their defence, and lay out where they want to go with this. But it looks bad because it is bad. That young man was a threat to nobody but himself in that streetcar. They could have locked the doors, de-escalated the crisis, as police are trained to do, and waited it out. The question is, why didn't they wait it out when no one was at risk and no one was under threat? This is the answer that will have to be met, and this will come out, I think, in 2014. We think that the trial will get underway, if indeed it does go to trial.
Simon, thank you.
Pleasure.
Simon Kent, Toronto Sun.